two armed men jumped out of the back seat and instructed me to get inside. And so I spent the first 27 days in solitary confinement. I was 50 feet underground, cell had no window, it was all concrete. I had nothing but a small blanket to lay on the floor as a bed. I found that faith isn't always easy, but it is always available.
What happens when a journey to all 193 countries turns into a fight for survival? Today, best-selling author and speaker Sam Goodwin shares how uncertainty became his greatest teacher. Welcome to the 11 Talents Podcast.
Sam, thanks for joining us. I just want to get right into your story because it's such a unique story. Tell us how it came to be that you wanted to travel the world.
So I went to undergrad in upstate New York at Niagara University. I played hockey there. Mm-hmm. And when I graduated in 2012, I ended up taking my first professional job in Singapore. And I originally only planned to be in Singapore for about 3 months, but I ended up staying for 6 years. And it was a fantastic opportunity, a great way to begin my professional career. I was working for a tech startup business and an NGO that was doing development work around Southeast Asia. But throughout that time, I also traveled as much as I could. I was in my early 20s in the heart of Southeast Asia. I had a little bit of flexibility. My work schedule, I had the world's best airport in my backyard. And I just took advantage of the opportunity to explore as much of the region and beyond as possible. And I put that formula into play for about 6 years. And in early 2018, I realized I traveled to about 120 countries in the world. And
wow.
For me, travel was never about ticking boxes or checking places off a list. It was always about learning. Travel's the best education that I've ever had. And it was really just this unrelenting curiosity.
I mean, as a kid, did you grow up traveling everywhere? Or?
Most of my travel as a kid was just around the U.S. playing hockey.
Okay.
So we would go to Michigan playing ice hockey. Yeah. And grew up actually just up until 6th grade, just down the road from the Legatus headquarters in Toledo. Okay, so spent a lot of time playing in Ann Arbor as a kid, actually. So that was kind of my view of travel when I was younger, and then kind of had the opportunity to go overseas, and that's where it's kind of evolved.
So you went to 120 countries. How many countries are there in the world? Maybe I should know this as a college
depends on who you ask,
but
not who you ask. It depends on
what year I ask.
And just what number you want to use. But there are 193 fully recognized UN sovereign states. Okay. So that was the number that I used.
So you were at 120 and then realized hey, maybe I should put my toe in every country.
I was like, maybe I could go to all of them. I didn't even know how many there were at that point, because travel for me was always about learning and new people and experiencing new things. I did some research. I learned there were 193, and kind of the competitive athlete kicked in and likes to pursue goals and try to do new things. So I wasn't sure if I could do it. It might fail miserably. I don't even know what that would look like, but I decided to try and give it a shot. And from that point on, the next, my style of travel changed a little bit. I was just moving a little faster. It's not really something that I would recommend, but it was the goal had temporarily changed.
So you had a criteria though for what it meant to you couldn't literally just dip your toe in the sand there, but you had to. What was your criteria for going into a country and to be able to check that box?
So travel means something different to everybody, and I think that's the beauty of it. For me, I didn't count airports. I didn't count just stepping over the line. For me, it was always about experiences and meeting people. So I lived in Singapore for 6 years, and there were a few places where I spent a few days and kind of everything in between. So, I didn't have unlimited time or money or resources. So I frankly did the best I could.
Yeah.
Was what I did.
So the experience, you're having a meal, you're actually doing something in that country, and you ended up getting to 193.
A gauge that I sometimes try to use is that if I could have a conversation with somebody in that place about something we did, then I had been there.
Okay.
That was just one way to look at it.
You can consider yourself an extrovert or an introvert?
I think probably more of an extrovert, but I do like my alone time.
Yeah. So you went to all these countries by yourself? Like, is that how you usually travel? Just single, doing your own thing?
It was a range, a lot of different styles. So I traveled quite a bit with family and friends, other travelers, did a lot of solo travel too. I mean, there are 54 countries in Africa. I went to 42 of them solo. Yeah. And there's great things about both, in my opinion. You know, it's nice to be solo and be able to do things when you want, how you want, where you want. Yeah. At the same time, there's nothing like sharing those moments of discovery with loved ones, with people you care about. So it was a balance, and enjoyed both.
So I'm keenly interested, being a Marine and having spent some time over in Iraq.
Yeah.
Did you ever visit Iraq or or even Afghanistan? I mean, we're relatively the same age, I think. And I imagine it was during that time of conflict that you went to both of those countries. Like, what was that like? Are you sneaking in and sneaking out? Like,
so, I mean, specifically those two places, like in Afghanistan, I went in 2018. It was pre-Taliban takeover, you know, had a really great experience. I actually went with a couple friends of mine who were coaching a volleyball camp in Kabul. And that was how I went there. And,
wow.
And we went up in the mountains and had a local man let us stay at his house. And, you know, it's some of the best hospitality that I've experienced anywhere in the world has been across the Middle East in many of these places. And, you know, there's a lot of things to say, but it's oftentimes maybe our governments don't agree, but underneath that, there are a lot of other things happening too.
People are still people that
people
are
just like us.
And
the overwhelming majority of people in the world are well-intentioned, proud of their country, happy to help others. And it's often just, in my experience, just a small subset of people that give a much larger group a bad reputation.
Yeah. But something did not go well for you in the Middle East.
Yeah. So I traveled to every country in the world, and like any worthwhile venture or endeavor in life, it wasn't without its challenges. And perhaps most notably, in 2019, I had been to 180 of 193 countries. And it was May 25th. I went to Syria, and it was just 2 hours after arriving. I was walking through a roundabout on the way to meet up with my guide, when all of a sudden a black pickup truck abruptly pulled up next to me. 2 armed men jumped out of the back seat and instructed me to get inside. And thankfully they weren't violent, but I didn't have a choice. And I was scared, confused. I had no information or anyone to help. I was desperately trying to understand what was happening. And
are they speaking your language? I mean, English?
They either didn't or weren't willing to speak English. Okay. And the language barrier was one of the challenges that I was really facing there. You know,
in Iraq, we used to say that, you know, rifles spoke all languages. And I assume that these guys were armed and they didn't need to say words.
They spoke that language for sure, in addition to Arabic. Yeah.
Okay. So you get abducted, or like, I mean, what do you call this? Kidnapped?
Kidnapped, taken hostage.
By the government, do you think, or by insurgents? What kind of, who is this?
So the people who held me were Assad's forces. So Bashar al-Assad, the former president of Syria, they accused me of espionage, of being an American spy and collaborating with terrorists, and nothing like this had ever happened to me before. And they went on to hold me. They went on to hold me for 9 weeks in some pretty uncomfortable situations, which happy to talk as much or as little about it as you're interested in. But
9 weeks. So tell me though, I mean, you're alone, despair, I'm sure, sets in, and you have no idea what's going on. I mean, what's your day-to-day like in terms of keeping morale up?
So I spent the first 27 days in solitary confinement. I was 50 feet underground. Cell had no window. It was all concrete. I had nothing but a small blanket to lay on the floor as a bed. The only human interaction I had was for a few seconds in the morning and evening when the guards brought bread and boiled potatoes and water.
And at that point, did you know why they were keeping you there, or why they thought that they were keeping you there?
Not really.
Okay.
Not really. I was picking up bits of information here or there, but I didn't know for sure, and I had no communication. There were a range of things that I leaned on for strength in that situation. I leaned on perspectives that I developed from traveling to different corners of the world, which provoked gratitude for just the basic food and water I was being given. I leaned on skills and traits I developed from being a competitive athlete, the mental toughness, critical thinking, resilience, and how often have we had a boss or a coach tell us control what you can control. I leaned on a belief that I had a purpose in life and a desire to see family and friends again. None of those things were as important as my faith.
So you did have a strong faith growing up, and that you could rely on when you were down in the hole.
I'm so grateful to my parents for instilling a strong Catholic faith into my 4 younger siblings and I. I would have been in a totally different situation without that. I found that faith isn't always easy, but it is always available. And I was in a situation where everything had been taken from me, my material possessions, my communication, my freedom. But no matter what, they could not take that. And that was where I found a lot of strength.
Yeah.
I began to lose the energy to be afraid. So, fear is an emotion. It takes energy to generate that emotion. And I was so emotionally and psychologically exhausted that I became unable to even generate the emotion at some point. And at that point, I became actually okay with dying and death. And what I found, though, was that there's actually, to your point, there's actually some comfort in death because not a single person has managed to conquer it. And it's perspective getting to that point. Yeah.
You doing like push-ups, sit-ups, or are you just sitting there praying and kind of vegging out? What's that experience like?
So to that point, about 6 months after I came home, I was invited to Fort Bragg in North Carolina by the U.S. SEER team. So survival, evasion, resistance, and escape. And you would know more than me, but my understanding is these are members of our military who are put on missions where they're at risk of being captured.
Yeah, all branches of military go through this SEER training.
Okay.
Yeah.
And
certain people of these branches. I never went through it, but I mean, it's for all special forces, Rangers, people, certain pilots that are going to be exposed to the possibility of POW.
So they asked me to come down, and I was actually pretty encouraged by our military for inviting me. I don't know how much value I offered, but what they wanted to know was actually the answer to your question that you just, they wanted to know, what did I do day to day in that situation without any training, right? And it turned out that some of the things you mentioned, so I would pretend the cell was full of people and tell stories. I would sing songs, even though they told me to be quiet. I would remember hockey games that I played in my life, start to finish. I had time to eat. I had time to pray. I had time to exercise. And as I was telling them this, what was communicated was that I had a routine. And what they told me was that that's actually something they teach in their program. In Captivity is develop a routine. And so I think some of that maybe came from, a career as an athlete, but that was something that they, they taught, and it really helped me. And I think about in our life today, how much more productive are we when we do have a routine and a plan? And so I think there's some overlaps there.
So you're there again for how long?
Total for 9 weeks, for 63 days.
Who was counting?
62 nights.
What was it that finally got you out of Syria?
One of the most overwhelming things for me when I came home was learning about everything that happened on the outside while I was on the inside, and none of which I knew anything about. My family was working with the government, and they were incredible people. They were, opening a lot of different doors, working on the case. The challenge that they had was there were no diplomatic ties between Washington and Damascus. So it became a tough situation. It turns out that my I'll just mention, I wrote a book about this experience, and this is very much, the Reader's Digest version of what happened. And there's more if anyone's interested in that.
Saving Sam, right?
It's called Saving Sam. One of my younger sisters, her name's Stephanie, she had a college roommate who is also named Stephanie, who is Lebanese. And roommate Steph's uncle is good friends with the head of Lebanon's internal security, kind of like the head of the FBI here in the US. And he was able to go to his counterpart in Damascus and essentially ask for a family favor to have this American released.
At what point, though, did you learn after the fact that they realized Sam didn't just get lost, Sam didn't die on the side of the street, he was taken hostage? Like, at what point did they learn that?
So the news of my disappearance was essentially learned through me going dark. I was always very good about keeping in touch, especially if I was in more of an unstable place. And I communicated that I was going to be there for just a few days. And when that time passed and people weren't hearing from me, they began to worry. So they figured something was wrong pretty quickly, like within 2 or 3 days.
Yeah.
It wasn't until about halfway in, about 3 or 4 weeks in, when they, my family through the Lebanese, started to get some decent information of, where I was and who was, holding me.
So you come back to the U.S. And this is 2019.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
And I mean, are you given a hero's welcome, or is this kind of undercover? Nobody knows.
It was. I just flew back with my parents, who had come to Lebanon when I was released. It was facilitated that way
through Lebanon.
It was through, yeah. And so I came back to St. Louis.
Wow.
Yeah.
And so now, I mean, you take your message, which no one has experienced what you've experienced, and you speak to a lot of CEOs, presidents, business people because of this spirit of resilience. But what is the biggest lesson that you teach or try to impress upon them?
Yeah, I've been trying. I've been surrounded by a lot of good people. I don't want to be known for the things that happen to me. I want to be known for the way I've responded to them. And I hope that people who hear me speak or read my book will be empowered to adopt a similar mindset and implement it into their own personal or professional, spiritual lives. My primary theme is uncertainty. And essentially, I was pushed to this point of overwhelming uncertainty, truly life or death. But through that, I learned some things that helped me and some things that I think can help all of us when we're facing our own forms of uncertainty. My presentations are narrative driven and include the dramatic elements of these stories, but also weave in and conclude with key principles that I think we can all adopt.
Yeah. So what are some of those principles that you impress upon them?
So I communicate a 3-step framework for navigating uncertainty. The title of my primary keynote is called Winning Through Uncertainty. And it's made up of leaning into gratitude, controlling what we can control, and recognizing uncertainty as an opportunity. And it's one thing to do each of these in isolation, but what I advocate for is doing these 3 elements in that order to embrace and manage uncertain times.
Yeah. So, I mean, going back to the whole Syria thing, though, I mean, I think a lot of businessmen and women, anybody, parents, every individual faces adversity. They fall down, and then they get up. But sometimes they don't deal with the fallout. Like whether it's therapy, whether it's talking to somebody, a spiritual director. They sulk. They get this victim mentality. Like I'm the victim, and I'm just gonna, poor pitiful me. Like, how do you address that, especially for people in the business world?
When I came home, I wasn't sure. It was a whirlwind. I didn't know what was going to happen or what was going on. The 2 most important things for me were being surrounded by. I actually did an interview with USA Today recently about the hostages who were released from Gaza, and was giving some advice to them as they were released. And one of the things that I mentioned was being incredibly intentional about who you surround yourself with, especially in the early days and weeks, because I was so fortunate to come home to a family and have that support. The other thing was my faith and just viewing the world through a spiritual lens. I believe that this was given to me for a reason, and there was an opportunity there. It took some time for that to manifest, but those were really the two key things. And today, I think we're all stronger and more resilient than we can imagine. And uncertain times are exactly what we need in order to grow. And oftentimes, like, people will come to me and be like, "Oh my gosh, Sam, I never could have done it." And it's like, well, I don't think we oftentimes know how strong we are until strength is our only option. And that's what it's one of the things I try to communicate.
Yeah. Diamonds are formed under pressure, right?
I mean, exactly.
There you go.
Exactly.
When you came back, what led you to start speaking about it? Because you think about, or I think about at least, like Vietnam veterans who come back and are like, these people don't understand what I experienced. And you're saying you surround yourself with people. And I know coming back from war, in my case, or in current day military, like, you go through a month of decompression. What did that look like for you, and what gave you the oomph to say, you know what, I'm not just gonna hide under the bushel basket or whatever. I mean, I'm gonna share my story.
Yeah.
Like, was that the healing part of it?
Yeah. And thanks so much for your service. So much I could say about that, but I didn't feel so much survivor's guilt as I felt what I often characterize as survivor's responsibility. And so I felt like I had been given something significant. I realized and learned very quickly that a lot of cases like this don't end the way that mine did. They end very differently. I came home in July of 2019, and actually 2.0. So about 6 months later, COVID hit, and it was like isolation 2.0, and like CNN's having on all these like prisoners of war to talk to the public about like how to deal with feeling trapped and all these things. So, but this was July 2019. I came home, and I was getting connected with different people, and there were people saying like, "Hey, you should tell this story or talk about it, or maybe there's some things that people could learn from it." I wasn't sure how to do that. I failed public speaking in college. Like I didn't know. It's like, wasn't totally the case, but I didn't know how. I'd never done it before.
If that professor knew now.
Right. Yeah. But in February of 2020, the St. Louis chapter of Legatus was hosting what ended up being their last in-person meeting before COVID. And the speaker that evening at that event was scheduled to be my mom. And around the new year, my mom went to the chapter administrator and said, "Hey," her name was Chrissy, awesome woman. She said, Chrissy Chapeau. Yeah, amazing. She said, "Hey, so I'm wondering if I could give my spot to my son." And Chrissy was like, "Well, like, okay." like
was she going to speak about your story?
Right. Like he's got this like thing that happened. And at that point, like I waited a year and a half before I did any like news stories. Like I did a couple, it was a year and a half before I did this story with the Wall Street Journal and NPR. And so, but I waited that long. So no, I hadn't talked about it like in the news. And so Chrissy was like, kind of like, "Well, okay, I know you, and like, okay, whatever." So I prepared like 50 hours for, a 25-minute talk. Yeah. And I went there
to a friendly crowd.
To a friendly crowd. Totally. And so I went there, I stood in front of them, looked at my iPad. Not sure I ever looked up at anybody. Thought I did a pretty poor job. And afterwards, a woman came up to me and said, "Hey, Sam, like this was great. Would you speak at Rotary?" And I actually wasn't really familiar with Rotary, but I knew that the answer to service in life is yes. So I just said yes. I went to Rotary, and there was someone there who was a leader at a bank, and he invited me, and it's grown from there. And today I do about 60 corporate engagements a year. I'm sharing this message. And so I think there's, a lesson in there for all of us saying yes to service in those opportunities.
Wow. So you're newly married.
Yes.
What do you think you're going to tell a future son or daughter about your experience? I'm just going to tell a quick story real quick. Because it's like not really answering the question, but it's like kind of a story. I was, this is like maybe 4 years ago. I was speaking at an event actually in St. Louis, and there was a Q&A, and it was kind of towards the end of the Q&A, and it was like kind of like winding down. It was like a real good vibe in the room. And this guy raised his hand, and he was kind of thinking about his question as he was asking it. And he's like, "So Sam, you," and this was before I met Natasha. This is like years ago. And he's like, "So Sam, he's kind of thinking about this. He's like, "So, you were in a Syrian prison, and, you're single. So is this like a first date conversation?" Or like, when does this come up? Right? Like, how do you, so it just reminded me when you asked about like the kids going forward. So when did it happen with Natasha? So when did you drop literally and figuratively the bomb?
So she, Natasha today works at Young Catholic Professionals, and I had done some work with them before. And so she was kind of like tangentially familiar with
so you didn't have to have that story.
I didn't have to like totally like do it that way, but we met on Instagram, and here we are today. But I don't know exactly how, maybe they'll read the book or see a film if that ever happens, something like that. So
wow. So you speak now to a lot of groups, and one of the things you do is public speaking coaching, right? And, as CEOs, presidents, like you are given the responsibility of presenting well to a board, to your employees. Like you have to invoke inspiration and motivation in them. Like what is your go-to advice for somebody in my position that's like looking for some key ways to change how we present?
So when I work with CEOs or event planners, I always get asked. I always get asked the same thing in different words, but it's basically like, cool story, Sam. But what does our firm do with this? What are your takeaways? And so when I do coaching, I kind of outline these three kind of levels of speaking. So there's entertain, inform, inspire for generally. So it's one thing to go in and just entertain people with a crazy story. It's like they're watching a movie, right? Kind of moving up the ladder. Maybe people learn something. So like in my case, maybe they learn about the government or the Middle East, something, whatever it is. Yeah. But what actually makes speaking sustainable is the inspire part. It's like what is something that a person in that audience is going to take from your message, implement it into their life or their team or their business, and it's going to make it better. Yeah. And so make sure the takeaways are very clear.
You want to put emotion into your presentation, which, requires, to leave an impression, to have somebody inspired. What is it that you do that, where you don't get yourself choked up in telling the story? Because I can only imagine the emotions that come up when you relive this.
Yeah. In the wake of this, I've come to know other people who were in similar situations. Like it's kind of like this.
No one has been in this situation.
Like other, like Americans who were held hostage, and and it's like the most elite club that nobody ever wants to be a part of. But we try to help each other, right? Like different things, and people come home and they deal with it differently. I mean, some people come home and they put the whole thing in a box, and we never hear from them again. Other people come home and the next Sunday they're on 60 Minutes, right? Yeah. Everything in between. And what I've found just personally is that telling the story and sharing the message is somewhat therapeutic on my end. So like today, I was so honored to be able to speak at the summit, and when I stand up there, I think in my mind, congratulations to all of you. This is now partly your problem too. It's as if I'm like spreading out the burden a little bit. And it might be a weird thing, in my mind, but that's kind of how I see it. And so, up to this point, I haven't had, challenges with that element of it, of reliving it, because it's felt kind of therapeutic and that I'm kind of spreading it out to other people.
I mean, that's a big part of the grieving process, right? It's like speaking about it, not to say it's grieving, but the emotional aspects of this. So you ended up going and getting your doctorate. So should I call you Dr. Sam or Dr. Goodwin? Which would you prefer? In foreign affairs from the Johns Hopkins University. Why? I mean, like, what are your aspirations? I mean, I can only imagine like you spent time in Syria and you're like, oh, I want to learn about it. But at the same time, it's like, I am done with that. Like, but what draws you to go deeper?
I'd spent 7 years. I was overseas for 7 years. I was in Singapore for 6, and then spent a year living in Dubai as well. And I viewed the world through a business lens and a travel lens. And that was an opportunity. I did my master's at WashU in St. Louis and then a doctorate at Johns Hopkins. And that was an opportunity to view the world kind of through an academic lens and get involved in that space. The other thing was, after I came home, going to school actually really helped me get back on track, so to speak. I'd been overseas for a while, had this happen, COVID, there was a lot going on. And so it helped me kind of get back on track. However, maybe more significantly, I think virtually everything that I've done in the past 10, 15 years has really been rooted in one thing. I would say curiosity. And if gratitude is the most important virtue, I think curiosity is the second most important virtue. And I think many of us suppress our curiosity by just going through the motions, and we miss little things that can change the world. And curiosity is the most consistent source of innovation and worldly contributions. And a lack of it, I think, is why so much upside is often left on the table. And so when I think about traveling to every country, starting a business in Singapore, writing a book, all these things are going to root in that. I think the world belongs to the curious.
So do you talk to CEOs and presidents about how to find peace about where you are? Like, how do you live? A lot of people are always striving for that next dollar, for that next like leveling up. Like, how do you like get them to be at peace and to acknowledge it? And still to yearn for it, but
I don't, that's not like a direct message that I focus on. I imagine potentially people take something like that from it a little bit, but I think maybe just the gratitude and perspective that I do talk about probably leads in that. There are so many examples, but there are 850 million people in the world who lack access to clean water, and people are complaining that their Instagram's not growing. Right? They give me, and so that perspective, I think, is so important. And so I think maybe they take some things like that from it.
So you are also a Ironman athlete, right? Tell me a little bit about that, because I may have been a Marine, am a Marine. May not have the physique anymore for that, but what drives you?
Again, it kind of goes back to the trying new things. There's a lot of overlap too. Like when I was in doing my flight training, my instructor always said to me, stay ahead of the airplane. And in the Ironman, it's staying ahead of nutrition, right? So, with the Ironman, it's swim, bike, run, but really what it is warm up, buffet, survival. So the idea is to finish the swim, feel like you've done nothing, which is hilarious because you just swam two and a half miles, right? Then the bike is just a buffet on wheels. Just consume as many calories as possible as your stomach can take.
Constantly pulling stuff out of your
just
pockets,
pulling their stuff everywhere, right? And then the run is survival. It is find a way. Find a way.
That's so. Tom Monahan is my boss, and he is great about, don't put the monkey on my back kind of thing. And it's like, this is your problem. This is why you were hired. Find a way. And so that's been kind of a mantra that I've impressed upon my staff. Like, you were hired to do a job, find a way.
The world belongs to those who are willing to suck at something long enough to become great at it.
Yeah. Which makes me think too, like, we have hiring now, employees. What do you impress upon the younger generations, especially for those like managers, supervisors, to build that resilience? Because we have weak men, we have a weak population. Like, what's the message?
Yeah. I mean, so I teach a course right now at WashU on entrepreneurship. And I think the three most important elements to being a good entrepreneur are flexibility, creativity, and resourcefulness. And I think the find a way really goes to that creativity. The other thing that comes to mind is I sometimes will think about or talk about so do you remember taking a trigonometry class?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So you remember the sine curve?
Yes.
And so it's this never ending up and down.
Kind of like
radio wave.
Yes.
So, yeah.
I was a radio technician, so I totally get that.
Okay. All right.
And the Marine Corps. That sounds weird outside of the Marine aspect.
Okay.
But
I want to be interviewing you. Okay.
No, you don't.
Yeah, I do. When things are good and we're at the top, it's important to have humility and awareness and gratitude. But I don't know that it's rare for anything deeply good to emerge from the top. It's always at the bottom of the curve where all the growth happens, where the find the way happens, where the creativity happens.
When you're scrapping your way through it.
When you're scrapping your way through, I mean, that's where the growth happens.
Yeah. When you got back to everyday life, and you're a busy man now, you're traveling a lot. I travel a lot. A lot of our members travel for business and whatnot. How do you keep that routine of prayer life?
One of the things that I talk about is in that cell, I felt this unbelievable closeness to God, something like I never felt before. I think we're never less alone than when we're totally alone with God. That was what I found in solitary confinement. I think there's a lot of good things that can come from a month of silence. But in the wake of this, I've found it challenging sometimes to replicate that, despite having felt something that I believe is so special. And I think a lot of it is because of all the distractions, like the phones, the meetings, all of those things. But I often try to challenge people to think about a time in their life when they felt closest to God or strongest in their faith. What would it take to replicate that, and why can't we? What's stopping us?
Mm-hmm. Who was your go-to saint that you would pray to and like try to? If I were in your position, I'd be thinking of Maximilian Kolbe or some of these saints. I mean, who was your saint that you?
So in the
on?
wake of it, it became Saint Charbel, who was a 19th century Lebanese monk, and my parents went there on the day I was released. While I was being held, so Saint Anthony is the patron saint of lost things, and I felt lost. And when I was in grade school, we had this prayer. It was, Saint Anthony, please come around. Something is lost and cannot be found. And it was very simple, but that's how I felt.
I've never written a book, and I can imagine a little intimidation of like, who really wants to hear my story, or like, who am I to put it on paper? Like, and I know a lot of CEOs that have written books and tell their story, and they're just a dime a dozen. But what gave you the courage to finally just put it on paper and put it out there? This also kind of falls into the therapeutic category a little bit, and speaking about it and writing about it. So just putting it down on paper helped a little bit. But I think I believed, and I still believe, in my family, and I believe that the story and the message can help people if it's told in a meaningful way. And so I think it kind of comes from that place of
responsibility. And if it's told in a meaningful way, then, potentially can help people. And maybe there are other ways beyond a book as well that could potentially do that too. So
what kind of things did your parents do? I mean, you grew up with a dad that was in the business world, running a business, engineering, right?
Yep.
What did he do that is something that you want to replicate with your own kids that also gave you the fortitude when you were taken hostage?
Among the many things that I learned from my dad was consistency. He was consistently at work, and he was consistently there for us. And that being a model of that is something that I'll always remember, and something that I hope to be able to pass down.
What's the message you want people to hear after reading your book? Like, what do you want them to go take away from it?
I think the story and the message is a reminder that borders may sometimes divide us, but our shared humanity unites us.
Yeah. What's the most common question you get from Legatus chapters when you speak to them? And this is a room full of accomplished people.
Yeah.
I used this term before, I kind of steal it from Halftime, but moving from success to significance, these people have been successful. Like, what are they asking you after hearing your story most?
There's like standard questions that I get pretty much every event. Like, what's your favorite?
I've asked them all, right?
Like, what's your favorite country? And
that is a good question. What is your favorite country?
Yeah, I mean, my favorite country is the United States, but my favorite country to travel to is, I often say New Zealand. I think it's the most. Is
that just because you love The Hobbit or what?
Never seen it, actually.
Oh.
Yeah. I just think it's the most naturally beautiful place in the world. I got a really great question from a Legatus member recently, and it was, so Sam, do you think that this experience delayed, did you think this experience totally changed your path in life, or do you think it just delayed you to getting to a place that you always thought you'd get to anyways? And it was like very philosophical, and I had to
take a moment
to think about it. I think I got back to him a couple of days later. But it was, so it's everything from like very fun questions up to like philosophical kind of deep things like that.
Very good. Well, Sam, thank you. Thanks for sharing your story.
My pleasure. Let me know when we can do the reverse.
Yeah. Amen. All right. Thank you, sir.